In this video, we clean install macOS Mojave on Windows 10 using VirtualBox. Hello everyone and welcome to TechFixFlix. In a recent tutorial, we performed a clean installation of macOS High Sierra on Windows 10 using VirtualBox. At that time, we noted that achieving a similar outcome using Mojave would be more complex, noting in particular that the lack of native support for HFS volumes in VirtualBox threatened to derail the project. In this tutorial, we will overcome this and other hurdles to create a Mojave installation ISO, then use that ISO as the basis for a clean installation on VirtualBox for Windows. As before, we can achieve the same outcome far more simply by downloading a pre-created hard disk file from the many sites offering this option. But again, in the interests of our data security, we prefer to build our own image. We'll briefly require the use of a real Mac for around an hour to download and package the installer, or if you followed our previous tutorial, the High Sierra virtual machine we created then will also be fine. We also need to qualify our use of the term clean installation. To be more accurate, it's as clean as we can get it given the hurdles we need to clear. We will therefore make two partial compromises. Firstly, because the Mac App Store doesn't permit the downloading of the full 6GB Mojave installer, instead downloading a 22MB installer app only, we will use a third-party utility to obtain the package from Apple's servers. Secondly, as VirtualBox doesn't support HFS volumes at this time, and without them the Mojave installation cannot proceed, we will also make use of a patch enabling them in VirtualBox. We begin on our Mac by downloading the third-party macOS Mojave Patcher Tool from the link shown on screen now and in the written description accompanying this video. We click Download to jump to the download links and click on the direct link, which begins the download. With the download complete, we close Safari and run the macOS Mojave Patcher DMG. The DMG opens, revealing the Patcher utility, which we run, only to have the application flagged by the operating system. We therefore open System Preferences, navigating to Security and Privacy, where we receive notification that the patcher has been blocked because it is from an unknown developer. We opt to open anyway. We are now required to provide confirmation, which we do. Closing the Security and Privacy dialog, we now see the utility, and we click within the window to give it input focus. This gives us access to the upper menu, and we click on Tools, dropping down to select Download macOS Mojave, which we click. We are advised via pop-up that we will be connecting to the Apple servers for a sizable download of the complete Mojave installer. We click Yes to proceed. We are then invited to provide a save location for the downloaded app, and we navigate away from the default, selecting our Applications folder. It's important to select the Applications folder, as the commands which we will subsequently enter in Terminal will assume that the installer is located there, and we will otherwise require modification. With that, the downloading phase begins, and we can take a break as the download progresses without our input. Once the download completes, we don't wish to create the patched USB installer drive offered, so we select Not Now. We can close down the patcher window, and we can also select the patcher image, right-click it, and eject it. Opening our Applications folder, we see that we have successfully acquired the Mojave installer. We can also see from the app info that this is the full-size installer at more than 6GB in size. It's time to create the ISO file which we will transfer to our Windows machine. If you've seen our previous tutorial, it will be no surprise to you that, in order to achieve this conversion, we need to enter 5 commands in Terminal. We therefore open Finder, select Applications, and scroll down to Utilities, then scroll down to reach Terminal, and run it. With Terminal running, we now enter our 5 commands, one at a time, pressing Enter after each. Once again, these commands are replicated in full in the written description accompanying this video, allowing you to simply cut and paste them as required. As before, we are not the author of these commands, and we would like to give credit and thanks to the original sources, again linked in the written description. The first command creates a blank virtual disk image. The second mounts the image previously created. The third command restores BaseSystem.dmg from the installer to the mounted image, and we see this visually represented on the desktop. At this point, we can unmount the image by selecting it, then right-clicking and selecting Eject macOS Base System. Returning to Terminal, we enter the fourth command, which creates our ISO file. We then enter the final command, which moves the ISO file to the desktop. We then close Terminal, and our desktop contains an ISO file ready to be transferred to our Windows machine. If you've made it this far into the tutorial, you probably won't require any assistance in transferring the file to the PC. And if you do need assistance, we cover this briefly in our High Sierra tutorial. We likewise assume that you are familiar with VirtualBox and have it installed on your PC. In the event that you haven't, you may wish to view our VirtualBox tutorial, which covers this topic in more detail. We therefore resume on our Windows PC with a copy of the ISO transferred from Mac and VirtualBox installed and running. We now need to configure the virtual Mac hardware upon which we will perform our installation. From the upper menu, we select Machine, where we create a new machine. The name we assign to the machine is entirely arbitrary, and we opt for the strictly literal Mojave. It's worth noting that later we'll be entering commands that use the name you choose here. If you follow our example and use Mojave, you can simply cut and paste the commands from our written description. If you call the machine anything else, you need to modify the name in each of these 7 commands. We then click the drop-down determining machine type, changing this to macOS 10. As we will be running a 64-bit virtual machine, we change away from the 32-bit default to our preferred option. Note that if you aren't offered a 64-bit option where you would otherwise expect it, you may need to ensure that virtualization is enabled in your BIOS. With basic device parameters configured, we can now click Next to proceed. The default RAM is set to 2 GB. We increase this to 8 GB. When increasing RAM allocation, remember to always ensure that you leave sufficient memory to support the function of your physical PC, and to use even numbered multiples of 1024 MB to match typical physical RAM capacities. We accept the default option to create a virtual disk now, and accept the default VDI format. We accept a third consecutive default with the dynamically allocated hard disk file. We could also accept the default hard disk size of 20 GB, although we increase this to 40 GB purely to give our installation a little more room. This is a purely experimental installation, and had we intended to make greater use of it, we would have allocated a more significant amount of storage. You may opt for far more. We click Create, and the machine is created. We now need to amend the machine settings. We therefore right-click the newly created machine and select Settings, which defaults to the General Settings screen. We therefore navigate to System Options. As the floppy drive plays no role in this installation, we untick it. We progress to the Processor tab, where the default is set to a single processor. As Mojave carries a dual processor requirement, we increase this to 2 processors. In the display settings, the default video memory is set to 16 MB, which we increase to the maximum value of 128 MB. Finally, we need to attach the ISO file which we copied from the Mac, which will serve as the virtual optical disk containing our installer. We therefore move to the Storage tab, where the virtual optical disk is empty. From the drop-down, we select Choose Optical Disk File, navigating to the installer ISO, which we've copied from the Mac, then selecting Open. The ISO is now attached as a virtual optical disk. At this point, you would imagine that you could simply double-click the virtual machine to run. However, it won't function correctly without the addition of 6 extra lines of configuration, which we need to add separately using an elevated command prompt. We therefore click the Start button and type CMD, selecting the option to run as administrator from the pane on the right. Where a user account control confirmation screen appears, we click Yes to advance. With the command prompt now opened with administrator privileges, we will enter a command to change the directory to our VirtualBox installation. Then, we enter 6 commands to ensure that our virtual machine will run, before we enter a final command to set the screen resolution. All commands are included in the written description accompanying this video, so that you can simply cut and paste. The first command assumes that you have accepted the default installation path for VirtualBox. If, like us, you have opted for a custom installation path, you will need to specify the full installation path between the quotation marks. This is the only time that entering a command will display confirmation on screen, as the remaining commands are processed without specific confirmation. The commands are run one at a time, pressing enter after each. Note that when we created our virtual machine in VirtualBox, we gave it the strictly literal name Mojave. If you followed our example, you can simply cut and paste our commands. If you've named it anything else, you will need to replace the word Mojave with the name of your virtual machine as you typed it. In all, you will need to replace the name 7 times. Again, we take no credit for any of these commands, which we have sourced from the internet, and again we give full credit and thanks to the original sources, which are linked in the written description. We again couldn't offer a precise description of their role, but having tested them, they are necessary to make the installation functional. The final command is far more transparent, and, Whilst we set a resolution of 1920 by 1080 to match this video, you are free to set any supported resolution to match your own display settings. With the 7 commands entered, we can exit the command prompt. It's time to run our virtual machine. Throughout the remainder of this tutorial, we will see many screens of white text on a black background. There are 2 key rules here. The first is to be patient, as these screens take a little while to progress, so don't give up hope when you encounter a pause. The second is not to take too literally anything you read. The text will try to convince you that files are not found, resources are not available, and there are errors. Read the text if you must, but know that everything will be just fine, because eventually you'll see the Apple logo on the Windows desktop. We'll take a moment purely to appreciate that, but we're still some distance from a fully working version of Mojave. As the progress bar completes, the screen dims and the language selection screen appears. We drop down to select the UK English version. Incidentally, if your mouse or keyboard aren't responding at this stage, you'll need to install the VirtualBox extension pack. We'll cover that step later in the tutorial. With our language selected, we advance to the macOS Utilities screen. There's a misstep you can take here, and we'll show you it for completeness. If you're copying our steps exactly, please don't follow this portion of the video. If we simply click on Reinstall macOS, we'd be wrong. Clicking Continue seems to take us in the right direction, so we click Continue a second time, agree to the terms and conditions, then confirm our agreement from the drop-down. We are then taken to the disk selection screen, only to find that we are not offered a disk upon which to install. It's at this point we realise that we've taken a wrong turn. Let's rewind time to where we left off, back at macOS Utilities. We need to make a disk available to the installer, so we click on Disk Utility, arriving at this screen. We select VBox Hard Disk Media, and note that the disk is uninitialized. This is why we were unable to proceed moments ago. To make the disk available, we click to erase it, which brings up this window. We only make one change here, renaming the disk from Untitled to the more familiar Macintosh HD. The disk is then effectively formatted, and upon completion we click Done. We can now exit Disk Utility, but before we do, a pro tip which briefly held us up in our High Sierra tutorial. In the event that you cannot see the VBox Hard Disk Media drive, clicking the icon in the upper left corner, then selecting Show All Devices, will reveal any hidden drives. We now return to Disk Utility, where this time we select the option to reinstall macOS. The next screens are familiar from our earlier wrong turn, and again we agree to terms and conditions, then confirm that agreement. However, when we reach the disk selection screen on this occasion, we note a crucial difference in that Macintosh HD is now available to receive our installation. We therefore select it and click Install. The first long phase of the installation commences, and we can take a break here as it proceeds unattended. Eventually, the installation will reset, reverting to the white text. Note the opening declaration that boot failed, which is not a sign of failure, but rather success. Left unattended, this sequence will now progress right back to the start of the installation, so you should end it at any time by clicking the close icon to shut the virtual machine. The installer is attempting to boot from the virtual optical disk, and we need to break that sequence by ensuring that it boots from the hard drive. We therefore return to VirtualBox to eject the virtual optical disk. In the main menu, we right-click our Mojave VM, and again select Settings. From here, we're navigating to Storage, and selecting our Mojave.iso. We move to the disk icon in the upper right and click, revealing a drop-down from which we select the option to remove disk from virtual drive. The drive now shows as empty, and it's time to rerun the virtual machine, although we don't make much immediate progress, being dropped into the EFI shell. Once the 5-second countdown time expires, we type exit at the prompt. We arrive at this menu, which we navigate with arrow keys, selecting options by pressing enter. We therefore use the down arrow key to reach the Boot Maintenance Manager and hit enter. Once in the Boot Maintenance Manager, we drop down selecting the option to boot from file. Whilst the upper option is selected by default, we need to drop down to the lower option and we select macOS install data at the following screen. After that, we only have the choice of locked files at the next screen and only boot files thereafter. Finally, we drop down to boot.efi and press enter to run it. With that, the installation recommences with a further flurry of text. We again see the Apple logo, and at the conclusion of the progress bar, the screen dims and a second lengthy installation phase commences. At the conclusion of this installation phase, the machine will restart. We are returned to the EFI shell, At this point, we need once again to power off the virtual machine. We return to VirtualBox, where we will once again be inserting a virtual optical disk. This disk is the Tech Bloggers disk, providing support for APFS volumes. Without this support, our installation would stop here. The link for the installation ISO is provided in the written description accompanying this video. We right-click our virtual machine, once again selecting Settings, and again navigate to Storage, where our virtual optical drive is presently empty. We therefore select the empty drive and click the drop-down menu. As before, we select Choose Virtual Optical Disk File. This time we navigate to the Tech Bloggers APFS ISO and click to open it. The disk is now attached to the virtual machine. Before we rerun the machine, we're now at a stage where the editing of code in the startup file can cause a degree of chaos if entered improperly, which is very easily done. We therefore suggest that this is an ideal place to create a machine snapshot in order to return to exactly this point in the event that things go awry. With the machine selected, we simply click the Take button to take the snapshot. We then replace the default name with something more distinctive before clicking OK. You can take snapshots at any point in the process and simply right-click them and select Restore to revert to the machine state at the point in time at which the snapshot was taken. It's incredibly useful to be able to return to this point to start afresh in the event of mishap. We're now ready to restart the virtual machine. When we do so, we see this mapping table. In this instance, FS0 is our virtual hard drive, whilst FS1 is the virtual optical drive containing the APFS support ISO, which we've just inserted. We could leave it this way indefinitely, but this would mean leaving the virtual optical disk permanently mounted purely to access 3 files. It therefore makes sense to copy these 3 files from FS1 to FS0. To achieve this, we enter 2 commands at the shell prompt. As always, these commands are included in the written description accompanying this video. First, we type FS0: and hit enter. Note that the prompt changes from shell to FS0. Our next command will therefore apply to FS0. Next, we type copy -r FS1:/EFI, again pressing enter. This copies the EFI directory and its content from our optical disk FS1 to our primary drive FS0. Incidentally, if you are using the standard British keyboard layout on a Windows system, your / key is likely to be incorrectly mapped. Pressing the hashtag key, found above the right shift, worked for us. You should see a confirmation message indicating that the driver's directory and 3 driver files have been copied. If you don't see this message, you need to take corrective action as the installation depends upon it. It may be that you have mistyped and need to try again. If that fails, ensure that the FS0 and FS1 have mapped correctly, reversing them if necessary. Should you receive file not found errors, this may mean that the virtual optical disk isn't attached in VirtualBox, and you should return to the storage settings to correct this. In a worst case scenario, you can immediately wipe the slate clean by restoring the saved snapshot taken a few moments ago. Assuming all is well, we now need to edit the startup file in order to load the drivers at startup. To achieve this, we type edit startup.nsh and hit enter. We now have a blank editor window into which we can type our commands. In this instance, we are effectively using a text editor, so the commands will not be executed until we save and run them. Again, it's 1 per line, pressing enter after each, and again you'll find them in the written description. Echo off essentially suppresses the display of commands, whilst each of the remaining 3 commands loads a driver file from its new home on FS0. With the startup file edited, we can now save it. We press Ctrl Q and note the message that the file has changed and asking us to confirm the save request. We type Y for yes. We are returned to the prompt, logged in at FS0. At this point, we opt to close the virtual machine. Doing so allows us to eject the virtual ISO and check that its files have been copied to the hard drive and that they are included in the startup sequence. We've seen this a few times now, so we simply right-click the virtual machine, select Settings, navigate to Storage, select the APFS ISO, click the drop-down, and remove the disk from the virtual drive. Once removed, we again run the virtual machine. Now when the machine restarts, we see that our APFS drivers are successfully loaded. Although you don't need to replicate this step, if we now type map-r and press enter at the shell prompt, we have increased our options from FS0 and FS1 to include FS2 and FS3. This indicates that the APFS volumes can now be read. We build on this by returning to our startup file, once again typing edit_startup.nsh, then hitting enter. We return to the editor, where we should see the 4 lines we previously entered. As an aside, it's entirely possible to perform all of the edits to this file without the restart in between. We choose to break the task into 2 purely in order to see that the APFS volumes are accessible before continuing. Again, you may wish to take a system snapshot at this point, which may be useful if the load is unsuccessful. We enter a map command to remap the new drives, making them available to the boot sequence. We then change focus to FS3, which should be the volume on which our installer is located. In the event that it is not, we would immediately return to this line and change FS3 for FS2. Now we simply switch directory to System Library Services before running the boot.efi file. Once boot.efi runs successfully, it will be full steam ahead to complete the installation. Once our editing has finished, we again press Ctrl-Q, then type Y to confirm our changes. We are returned to the prompt at FS0, and we type exit at the prompt, then hit enter to continue. We now return to white text for the final time. The key here is to persist. If your drive light is flashing and the on-screen indicator is also flashing, then all is good. If instead you see an error message, you'll need to make amendments to startup.nsh, most likely swapping FS3 for FS2 as the resource from which the EFI boot file is loaded. We now see the Apple logo and we're very much in the home straight. Our screen dims before we are taken to the customization phase. Our keyboard and mouse became unresponsive at this stage, and we'll return to how that's fixed in a moment. From here onward, the process is thankfully more straightforward. As is often the case, the choices we make here are personal to us, and you can customise to your own preference. We begin by scrolling down to localise our installation to the UK, and the British keyboard is automatically selected for us, and we simply click to continue. We also simply click continue to advance through the next screen. As this installation is purely for demonstration purposes, we opt not to transfer information to it, and we similarly opt not to sign in with our Apple ID. We certainly haven't read Apple's terms and conditions, but we're positive that extracting data from their servers to create a customised installer which we then transfer to PC to run in a virtual machine is something which they would wholeheartedly endorse. And since we've lied about reading the terms and conditions, we'll lie a second time to maintain the first. As we haven't signed in with our Apple ID, we need to create a local account. We start by modifying the icon, and whilst he's a fine looking chap, we search through the defaults to find something a little more us, and that football fits the bill nicely. We now enter our full name, and as soon as we exit the full name field, our account name is automatically populated. We type our password twice for confirmation, and we can optionally add a hint to make it easier for hackers. We choose to customize settings at the Express setup screen, and we are content to leave location services turned off, even though we are invited to confirm this by the drop-down. We can now select our time zone by clicking on the map, or by typing directly into the text field. We don't wish to share analytics with Apple, so we deselect both options before continuing. We're devotees of the light side of the force, so we'll choose the light theme for now, although we note that we can change this later in system preferences. After a final setup stage, we can finally see our Mojave desktop. We need to configure our keyboard, which is as straightforward as clicking continue, before pressing the key to the right of left shift. We then click done to confirm our choice. We have reached the destination of what seems a very lengthy journey, and we now view the Mojave desktop in all its glory, running within Windows. You might want to image this machine state also, as things can get complicated hereafter. Specifically, once you close down the machine and restart it. Here, we see that FS3 is no longer recognised as a directory, despite us having just successfully booted from it. It appears that the map command is remapping the drives at boot up. We therefore return to FS0, repeat the command to edit the startup file, then we find the value for FS3, changing it to FS2. We again press Ctrl-Q to exit, and Y to confirm the changes. We are returned to the FS0 prompt, where we type exit before opting to continue. This loops us all the way back to the Mojave desktop. The problem here is that when we exit and restart, FS2 will no longer be found, and we need to re-edit back to FS3, which is far from satisfactory. Presently, we are endeavouring to break this loop, and if anyone can assist, we'd be very grateful. Drop us a line in the comments if you can help. We now return to keyboard and mouse support. To ensure that they function in a Mac guest, you will almost certainly need the VirtualBox extension pack, downloadable from the link shown on screen now and in the written description accompanying this video. Click the All Supported Platforms link to begin the download, which is quite small at just over 22 megabytes. Returning to the main VirtualBox interface, we click File, then Preferences, and at the Preferences screen, we navigate to Extensions, clicking on the plus icon in the upper right. At the Selection panel, we navigate to our downloaded extension pack and open it. We click Install to confirm our intention, then scroll through the license terms. Once fully scrolled, the option to agree is enabled, and clicking it installs the extension pack. With the pack installed, keyboard and mouse should be enabled in our virtual Mac. Now we've reached the conclusion of our Mojave Odyssey, we await the release of Catalina, when we will set out on a new quest. We'd love it if you were to join us for that and our other projects, and if you'd like to subscribe to the channel, we'll see you soon for more. In the meantime, check out our archive of past videos for more tech fixes. Thank you for watching this tutorial. Hopefully you found it useful. If you can provide a better, faster or more economical solution, let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you'd like more, you are very welcome to subscribe to the TechFixFlix YouTube channel by clicking on the subscribe button. Subscription is of course entirely free and provides easy access to all of the videos posted here. Clicking on the neighbouring bell icon means you will be notified whenever a new video is posted. You can also keep in touch by following the official TechFixFlix Twitter account. Until your next Tech Fix, goodbye.